when am I ready to date? Is anyone ready to date? So I think this is a very relevant, great first question to tackle in February. And so that was the first question that came in, and I have some thoughts, but I wanted to, defer to you first to make sure.
Well, yeah, let's go through what you have prepared, and then
Okay.
and then we'll talk a little bit afterwards, just kind of how we've experienced that in our own life.
Absolutely. Well, I've experienced a lot of heartbreak in my life, and so when I'm thinking of when am I ready to date, I think there are six key considerations. The first consideration in whether you have been in a relationship, whether you are in a relationship, or whether you want to be in a relationship, I think there are six key considerations before entering into your next relationship. The first key consideration is first, you need to decide whose voice you're going to listen to in this world. Are you going to listen to God's voice, or are you going to listen to the world's voice? Right? You have to decide in advance that Jesus's sexual ethic for relationships and sex are far better than the world's, sexual ethic for relationships and sex. And so imagine, again, this is super important because I think sometimes we think that Jesus's sexual ethic for our lives is oppressive and restrictive and not necessarily good. And so that's the assumption for a lot of people. But if you actually believe that God's way is way better and actually promotes human flourishing, you'll be much more prone to make better decisions when it comes to the people you date and how you date them. And so imagine if the world actually did adopt Jesus' sexual ethic. Like, imagine if your community, imagine if the media reflected Jesus' sexual ethic. There would be no STDs or STIs. There'd be no brokenness or divorce, right? Every child would have both a mother and a father, right? There'd be no sex trafficking. There'd be no pornography. There'd be no exploitation. There'd be no rape, right? There'd be no abortions. Like, this would actually promote something far better than what maybe is presented in our minds or even in media regarding living life according to God's ways. Imagine there'd be no deadbeat dads. There'd be no husbands leaving their wives for a younger woman that they found at work or whatever, Like, just think about what it would be like. And wouldn't we all want to live in a world where people did follow Jesus' sexual ethic? See, I believe that
At least towards us, right? Like, I think that would be I think many of us feel that tension of like, I don't know if it seems like a big thing for me to commit to God's way of doing relationships and sex. But if we think about people treating us the way that God would set things up, like that sounds much better.
Absolutely.
Than living in a world where someone could just decide at some point that we don't do it for them anymore.
No, yeah, exactly. And the thing is that since Jesus made sex and he made relationships, like, he actually made it very good. And Colossians 1:3 talks about how all things were made, through him and by him and even for Jesus. And so if we just actually lived underneath that protection or that covering, we would find that our relationships and our sexual desires and needs are actually way more fulfilling.
So you're applying that passage about all things were made for Jesus to the area of sex. You're saying that sex was made for God or his glory or his joy.
100%.
All right.
Yeah, 100%. Because honestly, sex, be it whether sex is a procreative act, right? And so therefore the expansion of humanity flourishes because we need sex
Procreative.
to make babies.
There we go. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Yeah, just in case. Yeah. So sex being a procreative act is beneficial for society. That also glorifies God. Sex is pleasurable. So if you have a husband and wife enjoying each other, that's actually a good thing, right? And then number 3, sex unites a husband and wife. It keeps them committed. It keeps you glued together. Now, that unity in marriage is just a mirror or reflection of the unity that God wants to have with his creation.
And so you're saying the first consideration.
That's why sex is
when I'm thinking
God,
about should I date, the first consideration is, am I willing to follow,
to come under
God over the world, or
Absolutely.
God over my emotions, or God over my natural pull towards.
Or God over your friends, or God over the media consumption that you're receiving, or whatever ideologies that are being propagated in the world today. You want to come under the fact that, hey, God's idea for relationships are way, way, way better.
Okay. What are our other considerations?
Oh, yeah, I got more. I mean, I guess I could have camped out. I mean, you had me going over on the sex thing, and I was like, oh, yeah, we can do that.
Sex is fun to talk about, but
Sex is fun to talk about, but it's also like it really does glorify God. Like God actually created sex for a reason, for his creation. So, anyways, the second consideration before you even start to even consider romantic relationships is you're not ready to date until you're ready to withstand the sexual pressures of the culture. You're not ready to date unless you're ready to resist the sexual pressures of the culture we live in, which is a little bit similar to what I said before. But I want to look at maybe a biological component, right? The average 16-year-old, but anybody who's in puberty, are experiencing an overload of endorphins, testosterone, dopamine, estrogen, oxytocin, and these are chemicals that are secreted in the brain whenever somebody touches you or you see an image that you like, right? And your brain, right, the decision part making in your brain, the prefrontal cortex, is not even fully developed for women until like 25, maybe even 27, and for men, there's studies that show that your brain isn't fully developed till you're in your 30s. So essentially what I'm saying is that if you're a teenager and you're considering to date and you're getting involved in romantic relationships, you are high, for one, and two, you have half a brain. So you don't want to be making major life decisions when you're high and your brain is not fully developed.
You don't want to be making them on the fly. You don't want to be making them without other people's input. You don't want to be making them without other people who have been there before pouring some wisdom into them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And consider the reality. You're essentially inebriated. It's very difficult to make wise decisions. You're going to make lots of decisions in our lives, and it's harder to make good decisions when you're like not inebriated. It's even harder to make good decisions when you are intoxicated with endorphins and dopamine, right? You wouldn't even let somebody drive. That's why we don't let kids drive. Right.
Imagine my 7-year-old out there driving around that little purple Mazda 3 of ours.
Exactly.
It would be messy.
Yes, not because it's a Mazda 3 that's purple, but just because.
No, I mean, people probably watch out a little bit more.
I'm nervous around that car.
Yeah, that car is not afraid to bump into anybody.
No, I'm just afraid something's going to fall off of it.
Yeah, the value on that car is not going down.
No.
It's already hit rock bottom.
Which is great. It's a great place to be. So that's what I would say. It's like, it would be like driving a car when you're drunk, dating, handling people's hearts, handling people's emotions, getting involved romantically can be very dangerous. It can be very rewarding, but also very dangerous.
So you need a foundation, right? So you need something to help you tackle those tensions, because those tensions are going to be there. It's going to be hard to escape those things. And so we need something to where we feel like we're ready to enter into something that's going to pull us away from God's way, which we've already in step one in our first consideration have decided is the best. All right, consideration number 3.
Consideration number 3 is basically you're ready to date when you've already pre-decided to have guardrails, right? Right, before, not during or after. Right? Now, guardrails is a term that I like to use. Some Christians use the word boundaries, and that's a very appropriate term. But I wanted to get your attention because I know that if we're going to talk about dating and you're a Christian and you're watching me, you already know I'm going to talk about boundaries. But
which is great. And I think, too, our second question will kind of touch on that area some also.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And so, but your real point here is, because we'll talk about boundaries, guardrails, that kind of stuff in a little bit. But you're saying you don't want to come up with those in the moment.
No, you don't want to come up with those in the moment or after you've already messed up or gone further than you are comfortable or further than the other person is comfortable. But whether comfort is in it or not, you should decide beforehand what those guardrails are. Now, I use the term guardrails just to give you a word picture. Is that in life you're going in a particular direction, and that direction is fueled by the vision of the future, right? It's the vision of the husband and the wife that you want to have, and the 2.5 kids. That 0.5 is a very small kid, or an animal, right? It's a dog.
There
right?
it is.
There it
Yes.
is. That
Fluffy.
0.5 too. It's Snuffy. If I can get a picture of Snuffy, boom. It's like the dog version of Grogu. And so it's
It kind of is.
picture of the future of what could be and should be that fuels how you respond today. That's what happens, right? That's what life is like. You're in a car and you're headed in that direction. And whatever that direction was, hopefully it wasn't fueled by Disney, but it's fueled by a biblical perspective of love, sex, and marriage. And it's a mutually respectable relationship that's committed for a lifetime. And, you're willing to, build strong commitments and like a strong bond with your spouse, and you want that to last forever. So that's where we're headed.
So if I were
Now-
to summarize too, I think a piece of kind of what you're talking about is that if we're committed to doing life God's way,
Right.
like he built our bodies for marriage,
Right.
and so when we're dating, our bodies want to go along the marriage path.
Totally.
And so we need to set up those boundaries to protect that vision of our future that we want to get to.
Absolutely.
And I think that's really wise.
Yeah.
Let's all right, that's halfway through. We want to get through these other 6
Yeah, let's
before
do
we
it.
run out of time. And so let's get to number 4
Yeah.
on things to consider. If I want to date, I want to be ready to date.
Okay, so you
What
want to
should I
consider
do?
the length of the dating relationship that you want. So again, with looking to the future, deciding in advance how long do you want. And so what I like to do is ask people to, work backwards. What age do you want to be when you get married? 25, 30, right? And then how long would you want to date your future spouse?
That's good.
6 to 10 years?
That's a long time.
Or maybe, but
That's
honestly,
a long time to fight all of the things that come along with being built for marriage, not for a dating relationship. Dating is not where we're supposed to camp out. And so we want to set ourselves up that if we're like, hey, I want to get married after college, right? Like dating all the way through college, 4 years,
it's going to be tough.
reasonable, but it's going to have some challenges in
Yeah,
play
I
there.
actually think 2 years is actually
starting
hard.
dating when you're 13 and you want to get married after college. If you find the right person with your
Yeah.
second girlfriend at 14 and a half, oh man, you're dating for a long,
Yeah.
painful amount of time.
And the reason why something like that would happen is because the person has not determined the goal, right? They haven't determined what the picture of the future could be and should be, and it's not fueling their decisions today. What's happening is, again, culture, friends, peers, media is kind of directing them, and it's not a straight line. And it's not going in the direction that God has for them. So I would just say work backwards. If you're trying to figure out what time or when to date, you want to determine when you want to get married. That will also ultimately determine when you should start dating.
All right. Number 5 on the considerations in order to be dating.
Yeah. You don't want to start dating. Basically, you want to start dating again when you've regained your identity from broken past relationships or a broken view of identity. And so, for instance, say, this particular consideration has to do with the person who's been in a relationship, who's messed up a couple times, and they're afraid to get into another relationship, or maybe they're itching to get into another relationship way faster than they should.
I've met a lot of people who don't feel like themselves unless they're dating someone else.
Yes.
And that's a scary spot to be. And if that's you, that's a good thing to take a look at and to be like, are you confident in who God has made you to be?
Absolutely. And so what happens is they may not have a proper view of who God made them to be because they don't know. They don't know how God made them. Right? They don't know that Genesis 1:27 says that they were made in God's image, that they are not an object to be used for the enjoyment of another person.
And not defined by other people's views of them. Which is honestly, if I'm being transparent on our podcast, like that's a huge thing for me in so many different areas
Right.
of life. Like I tend to want to define myself by what other people say about me. And that's real shaky unless the only audience that I'm listening to is what God has to say.
Exactly. And so my biggest thing is that this goes back to the voices that we've been listening to. And so if you're a woman who've been either sexually abused or you've allowed yourself to be a sexual object for another person, you probably should not get into another relationship for, I would say, at least 12 months until you've refound your identity apart from another person using you or viewing you as a sexual object. And but the society that we live in, I just want you to know, I believe is teaching men and women three things about women. Is that they're objects to be used, they can be discarded at any time, and the woman should be amicable about it. They should totally expect that to happen and move on to the next one. And I think once we get that out of our system, which means maybe a media fast, maybe not watching as many Disney or romantic comedies or whatever.
Or even being aware when we're bringing it in.
Yeah.
That so many of the things that we're watching that paint a picture of the good life stand in either direct opposition or just even like pull away from God's view of things. And so we want to get our identity grounded in what Scripture has to say about us, grounded in what Jesus has done for us and who he's created us to be, and not in the relationship that we want to jump into next. All right, number 6, Kelly. These are all great. These are going to all be individual like sermons.
Well,
and
I think the problem
somehow I
is
feel like they may have been at some point. You've got a lot of multi-points coming out here.
I
and
know,
illustrations ready to go for us. But number 6, what's our last consideration?
The last and final consideration for this podcast, there'll be more this Sunday when I'm teaching with Michelle, is that you're ready to date when you've decided to date for the Lord. See, 1 Corinthians 7 talks about singleness as a gift. Right? If you're not single for the Lord, you cannot be a double for the Lord. Right? Right? It's just as simple as that, right? And so that's the reality is that, 1 Corinthians 10 also affirms that whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you drink, whoever you date, do it all for the glory of God. And so when you've decided and you are practicing, because right now it's the time to practice glorifying God as a single, it'll be good preparation for you to glorify God as a double.
Cool. Sounds good. I think these are all really great considerations, right? Whose voice is most important? Are we going to listen to God as number one? Are we ready to stand against the sexual pressure of our world around us? Do we have that foundation? Have we decided on what our guardrails are going to be in our relationships? What length of relationship do we want to do? And does it make sense to start that relationship now? Mm-hmm. Do we have a healthy view of our own identity, and are we ready to glorify God in this area of our life? Those are great considerations, and I think really healthy things to take an honest look at our own life if we want to be people who are dating. Now, obviously, you and I are coming from not a place of having done dating perfectly. We've had our own share of heartbreak, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
We've made our own mistakes, but I think all of these are really great if someone's wanting to start dating or is between relationships right now. Is a great way to take stock of where they're at. Cool.
Absolutely.